Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Thank you very much for attending this webinar jointly organized by the Islamic Development Bank, ISDB, and the International Islamic Trade Finance Corporation, ITFC. I am delighted to virtually host you, as well as host our distinguished speakers today. Before we start, let me walk you through some of our housekeeping items. This is a live webinar through Zoom. Only the speakers and the presenters can share their audio and video to the attendees. However, attendees can ask questions through the Q&A function. So please do ask questions. The chat will be disabled for the attendees. Please note that there is simultaneous interpretation in Arabic, French, as well as Russian languages. Moreover, this webinar is live streaming on YouTube. The YouTube link will be shared now in the Zoom chat, as well as it has been sent by email to all of our registered guests. And the live chat function is also available to receive your questions for the speakers and the panelists. Before we start, we have a short video clip to share with you. So let's play the video. Thank you, team, for this interesting video that gives an overview of the webinar that we are going to have today. So last month, the Agritech webinar looked from a macro level perspective and discussed food security and sustainability. The theme of today's Agritech webinar, however, is digital supply chain. So in the coming 2 hours, we will hear from the esteemed guests how digitally transforming the supply chain will significantly enhance the efficiency of agricultural value chains, empower local actors and agribusinesses, increase access to finance, reduce crop wastage, as well as boost the flow of agricultural trade. Moreover, we will hear about the interesting role and the new role of various technologies like blockchain, Internet of Things, IoT, and AI, artificial intelligence, in promoting sustainability across the value chain, which in turn will establish trust among financiers, producers, consumers, as well as other stakeholders. So let's get right to it. We will start with a panel discussion on supply chain 4.0, where we will be discussing global practices and lessons. Our panel of experts will be moderated by Dipesh Patel, who is the editorial director at Trade Finance Global, TFG. In this role, Dipesh leads efforts in developing TFG's brand, relationships, and strategic direction in key markets, including the UK, US, Singapore, Dubai, and Hong Kong. Dipesh is the host of Trade Finance Talks podcast and Trade Finance Talks TV. He is also the co-author of Blockchain for Trade, a reality check with the ICC and the WTO alongside other industry research. Dipesh is a strategic advisor for World of Open Account and a board member of ITFA's Emerging Leaders Committee. He also sits on the FinTech working group of the Standardized Trust. Very interesting and exciting career, Dipesh, and we look forward to your insights in moderating the panel with your distinguished guests. Dipesh, over to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, salam alaikum and welcome. My name is Dipesh Patel, editor at Trade Finance Global and host of the podcast Trade Finance Talks. Welcome to this series of webinars on Agritech and digital supply chains. I would like to extend my thanks to the Islamic Development Bank and its member, the International Islamic Trade Finance Corporation, for inviting me on this panel today. Supply Chain 4.0, Global Practices and Lessons. Now, 45% of crops around the world that are produced still go to waste. And it's estimated that 690 million people around the world were estimated to have been undernourished last year. COVID-19 has also revealed huge fragilities in agri-value chains, which often stem from emerging and developing nations, where the large percentage of people really rely on agriculture for their livelihoods. We're not doing enough if we are to end world hunger by 2030, but there is a silver lining. Now, we talked about Supply Chain 3.0 around 8 to 10 years ago, which meant implementing basic IT systems, leveraging digital capabilities, and trying to plan and forecast and increase yield and efficiencies in supply chains. Yet 8 years on, we still have a huge problem. And it's in relation to this guy here, my lunch, of course. I wrote about the problematic avocado in my recent publication on DLT for trade with the WTO. A recent study conducted by Maersk showed that one shipment of avocados from Mombasa, Kenya to Rotterdam can involve 30 parties, 100 people, and 200 information exchanges, some electronic, others on paper, some even on post-it notes. All of that for a bit of healthy fat. So what can Supply Chain 4.0 do to solve the age-old, antiquated supply chains we still face today? How can we apply the Internet of Things, the advanced use of robotics and big data in supply chains? Can we realistically use sensors, create networks, automate, and constantly analyze to radically improve performance? So that's what we'll be discussing in today's webinar. So without further ado, I'd like to invite my panel to join this virtual webinar discussing Agritech solutions from a multilateral vendor, technology, and investor perspective. I'd like to welcome the panel. Wolfgang Lehmacher is a board member, executive advisor, and business angel. Wolfgang is a supply chain and technology strategist in the transport and logistics sector, with a number of positions within the World Economic Forum and leader of Catalyst Supply Chain Innovation Network. We also have Sachin Gupta, global agribusiness offering leader at IBM, with interest in AI, IoT, remote sensing, and blockchain. Oswald Collier, recently appointed managing director at the DSI, that's the Digital Standards Initiative led by the International Chamber of Commerce, ex-head of data strategy at BHP, and also welcome Philip Harris, co-founder and president at Forbes 25 most innovative agtech startups, ripe.io. So introductions in no more than 60 seconds. And for those who've heard me before, this is your elevator pitch. Please, can you let our audience know a bit more about you and what your companies do in no less than 60 seconds? Sachin, over to you.
Hey, thank you, Dipesh. Thank you, Nasser, for having me on the panel. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sachin Gupta. I work for IBM and I lead the agribusiness and sustainability offerings. I'm basically from India, but located in Singapore right now. I've been in IBM for about 11 years. The career goes around 21 years. primarily in agri and food sector. And we at IBM have been trying to enable the food supply chain transformation, primarily digital transformation through different technologies, that Dipesh talked about. And, I hope that we get an opportunity to, speak about that, as we move forward on the panel. So essentially, my passion lies in applying technologies to solve real industry problems, make the food supply chain more efficient, more effective, so that nobody goes hungry at the end of the day.
Thank you. Oswald, I noticed you have some apples in your background, so over to you.
Thank you. Firstly, thanks a lot. It's an absolute honor and a privilege to join all of you today. So I really want to say I greatly appreciate that. My name is Oswald Kaler. I work for the International Chamber of Commerce. We're the institutional representative of over 45 million companies across the world in over 100 different countries. And so that places us in quite a unique position where we're not here specifically focused on one industry, but we have that macro view across all of them. And secondly, we're not specifically focused on any specific region. So even though I'm also from Singapore, we have a global view. I'm driven by the absolute need for us to transition our trade digitization from single-digit performance numbers to critical mass, and to enable our SME community to live in a world where they can select the platform of their choice that enables trade and not have to deal with some of the complexity that they are faced with today. My superpower in this landscape will be standards, and we will all work together to help and solve for that. It would be a community engagement. Thank you again, and thanks for the invite.
Thank you. Wolfgang, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dipesh, and Nasser. Thank you so much for having me on the panel, and I'm really delighted to have this important conversation today. I'm working with large companies, with startups, international organizations, and academia to improve the supply chain ecosystem across the world. This includes some work around Hyperloop technology to revolutionize maritime trade. That includes papers I'm contributing to with the World Economic Forum. And this also means a lot of work on boards and think tanks. I'm on an expert committee under the patronage of the German government. I'm on the board of the Logistics and Supply Chain Management Society in Singapore. I'm also on the IATA Air Cargo Innovation jury, just to name a few of the activities. My passion is around, and my focus is around globalization, to understand the shifts in the global landscape. What does the new, for example, RCEP agreement mean? What Brexit, etc. Then digitization is clearly a topic, and the fourth industrial revolution, which drove me across the world to talk about it. And then there is the big bucket of sustainability, which for me is the balance between economic, social, and environmental activities. So excited to be here.
Thank you very much, and I'm afraid Philip is having a couple of issues with joining here. So Wolfgang, I'm going to start. I guess the first stream here is really looking at the problem. As someone who really has an overview of all things technology, macro trends, and innovation in supply chains, what are the biggest issues in the agri and food sector when it comes to supply and demand, wastage, supply chains, and also MSMEs?
If I look at it from a 40,000 feet perspective, I'm always shocked by the waste in the supply chain. So there is enormous waste, and we have enough food on the planet. We're just not able to capture it and bring it to the people we need. Then there is, I think, also a challenge around the leverage the farmers have. And there are clearly companies that look after their ecosystem, but definitely we can do more with the technology we are having. So these are just the two main aspects I would like to mention. And there is, of course, a lot to it. To the waste, it has to do with infrastructure. It has to do with electricity. It's not there, with water supply, with visibility in the supply chain. And the other aspect around the farmer community is about their access to market information, their visibility, their direct contact with the consumer and what the market really needs. And if I just add a third point, as I mentioned, the consumer, there is of course a mistrust in the market from the consumer side in terms of the information they get in respect to, we know that big topics of fair trade, and we know biological agriculture, etc., etc.
Thank you. And I guess touching on the farmer's point and such, in a question for you, you mentioned in a recent interview that 50% of small farmers produce only 15% of the state's GDP. Why is this so? And also, why is it a problem?
Yeah, exactly, Dipesh. And, I think I'll build upon what Wolfgang said. And it's pretty apt that, if you look at the farming community and especially look at the small holders, which are essentially small farmers having less than an acre or less than a hectare of land, are pretty marginalized, and I would say there are three, there are many reasons behind it, but three primary reasons. One is the productivity or the yield of the small farmers are sometimes half or even less than that of commercial farmers, or large professional farmers. And that is because of, again, many reasons. One, illiteracy. These farmers, are, less educated. They have lack of access to the right information. They have lack of access to quality inputs. They have lack of finance, lack of equipment, etc., etc. The list goes on. But that's one reason. The second reason also is they have pretty ineffective market linkages. They primarily are dependent on social and political, vagaries and systems, depending on the state that you kind of take, pretty localized communities, and they are often shortchanged in terms of, what they get in return for their produce. So just an example here is, a cup of coffee that, you and I buy, for about, say, $2, $3, a farmer gets only about 1 or 2 cents out of that cup of coffee. So we are talking about less than 1% of the value going to the farmer. And the third really is their sensitivities to, various natural events, whether it is weather events or it is, any other, political or social implications that happens. These are the farmers who are most sensitive to any of these sort of systems. And hence, while the larger and commercial farmers are also face the same issues, but not to the same extent, and hence they are able to improve their productivity and yield over time, while smallholders are not able to.
Thanks, Sachin. And I guess going more to, going into more detail on the sensitive systems and this farmer issue, what's been the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic? Has it been a catalyst within IBM to look at approaching solutions in a different way?
Oh, absolutely. I think COVID-19 anyways has been, a big factor, but I believe the supply chain, the food supply chain transformation goes, well before that. And all of us know that, the world has been experiencing certain social, economic, political pressures. And that really had started companies and organizations and even governments to think about their own supply chains, their own suppliers. COVID has, I will say, only accelerated that sort of rethink and sort of that strategy. What we find with COVID-19 is a situation where there were, most of us kind of experienced, empty shelves. When we walked into our retail stores, there was, no food. And, you look at sort of the farmers, and you had situations worldwide where farmers were actually throwing away their produce because they had no one to kind of take those inputs. So you had a completely broken sort of a system. Second, I'll say even in terms of processing and manufacturing, we saw, how due to either, lack of movement of the labor, as well as, factory workers getting COVID, or, factories getting shut down, the output of certain food commodities or food products were hit pretty hard. And that is where people and companies really had to innovate and find either alternate sources of supplies, whether it is going for more local supplies, more shorter supply chains. But I think what COVID-19 really taught the world is to have a more resilient supply chain than the efficient supply chain.
Yeah, really interesting. And I guess as a bit of an outsider in terms of looking at the impact of COVID-19 in different economies, I mean, we saw whole garment factories in Bangladesh furloughing millions of people. I think that was something that John Denton at ICC was talking about earlier, and actually they saw the economic impacts or effects of COVID-19 before the health impact. So it's really interesting. Oswald, I think it's fair to say we're in a bit of a pickle now. We have thousands and thousands of companies using various solutions to address some of the supply chain issues, some of which have been around for a decade now, some of which have really come to light since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. What's the role of organizations such as the ICC when it comes to addressing these specific challenges?
Yeah, thanks a lot for that question. I think it's important for everyone to just recognize as we go through this digitization journey that ultimately from the buyer and seller's perspective, it's all about, and I have a little apple here, I'm not sure you can see it in a few on my shelf too, but it's all about how can they most effectively and efficiently produce their products and actually get it to the end customer. That's what their capabilities are built around. And fundamentally, that's the focus point. And so ICC's job in all of this is saying, how can we enable them to do that in the most effective and efficient way without having to deal with a lot of the complexities that they are faced with today? So you can imagine if you're an SME and your capabilities are specifically geared towards, the business that you're running, being faced with this new digitization era where you have all these different platforms out there, and you have to kind of select, well, which one am I going to join? And then when your customers or your banks or the shippers are on multiple platforms, it really adds a lot of complexity into their landscape. And from a capability perspective, not a complexity that they're used to dealing with. So when it comes to the ICC, how do we actually enable that? How do we work with various different industries, not just one, because we need all the industries to work together, shippers, the ports, banks, agri, etc. And how do we work with the technology platforms to ensure that we can standardize on elements like identity, as an example, or bill of lading, and do that in a way so that when that SME is trying to use a digital solution to enable their business, they can select one solution or the solution that best enables them, and they don't have to worry about the complexity that follows. So that's my perspective on the unique position that the ICC can play. We're not here to compete with anyone. We're literally just here to move the needle on trade digitization. If we want the business continuity that we all believe that technology can enable, and if we want to enable SMEs to get closer to their customers, have more opportunities, then we need to help them transition into a world where they can, leverage technology to do so. And we need to remove those barriers that exist today, capability, technology, etc. I can go on for an hour, Deepesh, but I'll pause for now.
Yeah, I'll stop you there. So I think we've highlighted the key problems, which are largely around financial inclusion in global value chains when it comes particularly to MSMEs and farmers, perhaps in the ecosystem. Fragile supply chains definitely exposed by the COVID-19 pandemic, wastage within supply chains, within the agri value chains. And also the inability to perhaps connect the dots within the ecosystem. Obviously, trade and supply chains are incredibly complicated when you look at from farm to fork, whether it's the shippers, the financiers, the farmers, etc. So let's go into the next stream of this session, which is really looking at technology and whether technology can help reshape supply chains. And perhaps I'm going to ask each of you on the panel to give a bit of an overview of how you see technology reshaping supply chains within the agri sector. And it would be good to cover both developed and emerging markets and technologies here, and looking at lots of different technologies, perhaps from the older APIs, the OCR technologies, right through to the novel technologies from IoT to AI, artificial intelligence to machine learning. Wolfgang, I'm going to start with you. I think you're on mute.
This is a very broad question. And I wonder whether we really should distinguish between the developing and developed world, because that puts again a fragmentation into the chain, and this is exactly what we wish to get out. In terms of what are the technologies that can help to overcome the challenges we pointed out. And the first one, and this is because Sachin is on the panel, which comes to my mind is TradeLens is a platform, is infrastructure, which can be used globally. What also comes to my mind is the fact that estimates are that about 20% of the data today comes from IoT devices and 80% from other sources and feeds. This will reverse by the year 2025, meaning that IoT and the amount of available data will be enormous going forward. And a lot here is about data sharing. And so for me, that's a mix about integration of systems, IoT, infrastructure and platforms. There is an element of blockchain in it, but there is much more, from my perspective, AI in there, because if we consider the amount of data, we need to be able to compute this. So we have the computing power, we have the cloud. So we are, I think, at the beginning of seeing a revolution in artificial intelligence and machine learning. And what is important as well as an additional layer is probably satellites, when we look at some agricultural areas to ensure compliance, etc. So for me, it is less about the technology. It's about bringing all these pieces together in a way that every stakeholder can benefit from this, and we can much better manage the areas which we mentioned before.
Absolutely. And I think when we talk about interoperability, we can certainly define interoperability as the ability for those different technologies to talk to one another, to, I guess, solve some of the challenges we've alluded to. Oswald, what are your thoughts? How do you see tech reshaping supply chains within the agri sector?
I think the way I would almost approach it is take some of those technology components on their own. So when I think about APIs and OCR, and I think about how just broad the spectrum is of the various organizations and ports, et cetera, that we're dealing with, is that ability for us to do the evolutionary step on digitization. So how do we potentially take the existing technologies that are out there, the existing documentation, and further accelerate the adoption of some of the, you need that evolutionary step in some contexts. Not everyone will be able to transition to something like blockchain at the same time. Even when you deploy technology with an organization, not all departments stand up at the same time. So you can imagine at a global scale, it's the same. When I move on to IoT and AI and machine learning, this is where I personally get quite excited, because I look at IoT as something that can uniquely with blockchain contribute to SMEs being able to extract even more economic rent from the investments that they are making in health and safety and environment-based investments. So being able to prove that into the supply chain and extract additional economic rent and gain that value, I think is going to definitely change the game a little bit. And it's going to help us change that $1, the 1 cent out of a dollar kind of paradigm, I think, a little bit, which is needed. It's going to help bring them closer to their customers too, which is fantastic news for us. And ultimately, finally, by us getting access to higher quality data, because we have IoT and all of these devices, the level of performance that we'll get out of machine learning and AI techniques are going to increase. So we'll see better yields, we'll see less wastage, and we'll see optimization of supply chains in the process. That at least is how I would kind of take a broad view of those different technologies and what they can enable.
Sachin, are the opportunities for you in I guess more of the older technologies such as OCR and APIs when it comes to I guess selling your products at IBM, or is the real opportunity around IoT, AI, and ML? And let's be honest, we're just scratching the surface of the potential of these opportunities.
Yeah, no, I'll say both. I think the traditional technologies have always, since they have been mature, more proven, we have, we know the business cases, we know the business processes, and, they obviously are still relevant. But I think the emerging technologies of AI, IoT, blockchain, and when I think of it in terms of the whole value chain. You think of right at the upstream side, when you apply to the farmers, the problem that you are trying to solve is how can this farmer produce more efficiently, at a lower cost. And you can enable that by use of several technologies today, AI, IoTs, and satellite imagery, et cetera, et cetera. And then when you kind of go through the chain, these technologies are equally relevant when it comes to harvesting, storage of these commodities in the warehouses. IoTs today enable you to sense the environment real time, and pretty much be able to quality control these commodities. And then the whole transportation logistics, obviously trade lanes is one example of that, where we have gotten number of companies, ports, customs, banks, shippers, freight forwarders, all on one platform, to enable sort of that traceability and transparency. And then I even go to sort of retailers, where it is equally important to today start by sensing what the end consumer wants. I think that is where the supply chain really starts. And consumers of today, and again, COVID-19 has played a role in it. They are demanding more sustainable, and transparent sort of food products. They want to know where it has been grown, how it has been grown, how it has been processed, etc. And there are, by the way, it is good for the earth, but there are now emerging economic models in it as well. So I would, I think to answer the question, I think there's a whole range of technology that I can talk about. I can take 2 days, to kind of talk about this, and go through several examples where this has really been transformed. But I think absolutely, both traditional as well as emerging technologies are both important in terms of making the supply chain more effective and efficient.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. Do we just bring all the technologists, the financiers, and the freight forwarders into a room to have a discussion, or perhaps do we turn this completely around and look at the end consumers or the customers in this? And perhaps Oswald, congratulations on your new appointment as managing director of the ICC Digital Standards Initiative. A huge challenge ahead, and I'm sure we'll be grilling you along the whole journey. How will the ICC DSI be addressing some of these challenges, and are you going to be looking at it from the end customer?
That's a great question. In short, yes. One of the things that I've intentionally have done is ask myself, what is different to our digitization journey today as opposed to the journey we started 2 decades ago? What are we doing differently? Yes, there's new technologies, but we do need a different approach. So at the DSI, one of the first things we did was we initially had those macro level conversations with the banks, with technology platform owners, to get a sense from them at least what's happening from their vantage point. But more importantly, after that, we went into micro level conversations with buyers and sellers in each industry to get a sense from each of them what's actually going on, what's happening, what's working well, and what are some of the challenges that they have. And I think this is important because one of the things that I think we need to do is we need to appreciate that different industries have different capabilities and different contexts. And when we think about the global transition to digitization, we can't exclude, for example, the shippers when we're at the miners trying to adopt digitization and trade. A very long story short, what we've come up with is 6 core areas that we're going to focus on at the DSI, and we're going to accelerate the adoption. My KPIs is not the amount of standards I produce, it's actually digitization of trade, getting us from single-digit performance to something that of critical mass. And we need to do legal reforms in various countries to ensure we have functional equivalency, and we need to massively up our game in that space to ensure that when buyers and sellers do transition to digital, the risks are mitigated. We need to ensure that developers actually understand and know what standards are out there already today that they can use when they develop these systems, and not reinvent how we do elements like identity, as an example. And finally, we need to work with all the various industries and the buyers and sellers in those to get a real appreciation for who's the best to actually define an electronic bill of lading standard. How do we bring different industries together? And how do we not spend the next 2 to 3 years trying to reinvent the wheel, but rather get everyone focused on solving for some of these challenges during the midst of a pandemic? I won't go through all of them, but I think you get a sense of A, who we spoke to kind of solidify our vision, B, what is our focus point is going to be, and then C, ultimately what our end goal is, which is literally just how do we digitize trade?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting, but by addressing that problem statement there. So let's talk about blockchain as a potential solution. Wolfgang, I'm going to start it with you. Is blockchain really the solution, or is it just a plaster on all of the back end systems that we currently have? I can see you're smiling.
It's a great topic to speak about, and I have spent quite some time in understanding, writing, discussing potential applications. And in theory, the concept is great, and it's in particular great when it comes to decentralization, when it comes to peer-to-peer relationships, because they can, due to that concept, happen without an independent third party, which is very often so important in business, in particular international business, when people don't know each other. So, but what is a bit the challenge is, from my perspective, that we are in a centralized world. So we have a lot of, or most of our approaches are starting somewhere at the center, at a driving force. And the philosophy and the idea behind blockchain is to break that paradigm. But I think we have not yet reached that point. So I think the technology has its place. Nevertheless, it will take probably another 10 years to see that technology bring out of the supply chain what it can. And from an investor point of view, and when I work with startups, the blockchain is a reality, but it's not a reality at scale yet. And that makes the difference between the blockchain and IoT and artificial intelligence and machine learning.
Thank you, and I think that that's really interesting from your perspective as an investor in the space. And I think, you know, as banks, multilateral development banks, ISDB, ITFC look at ways of digitizing a lot of their operations when it comes to, you know, supporting correspondent banks, etc. Particularly around difficult times like the current pandemic, it's really important to consider what the technologies might offer versus what are the problem statements. Sachin, you're a solutions provider at IBM, and does blockchain genuinely have a use case in your opinion? I mean, I guess I could rephrase it. Why can't IBM's existing technologies and very advanced, robust processes and systems address some of the key issues around provenance, track and trace, and trust?
Yeah. So let's not think of blockchain as a solution in itself. Blockchain is a technology that would enable a solution of a specific problem. So, for us, we always start with, what's the problem on the ground? What is it that we are trying to solve? And if you look at, food value chain, and I can give a few examples. Let's take food recall, as an example. Now, the food recalls have been, a problem and a concern, world over. And any of the food recalls, because of, any disease or any specific, problem in leafy greens or whatever, can entail, a cost of upwards of, $100 million, dollars plus. And the time that it takes to kind of take it off the shelf and replenish it back, it's a problem for the entire value chain and all the stakeholders. Now, where the problem really lies in the way these stakeholders and these organizations trust each other, and because that trust is missing, you either need some sort of an third party or an intermediator. And I think that is the vacuum that blockchain tries and fails to some extent. Okay, now obviously we are not replacing sort of an organization here, but there are certain features of blockchain, features like immutability, which essentially means, you can't remove a particular record. You can edit it, but, it will be known to everyone. Consensus, which doesn't mean that, any one single entity will have all the power. Consensus means, all the nodes and all the entities involved will have a shared responsibility. And it provides a way for the member organizations to do data governance and data privacy in sort of in the most efficient sort of a manner. And I think these are the features of blockchain that enable that particular use case. So food recall, again, as my example, what used to take probably weeks to do a food recall, and for companies and retailers to trace a particular infected leafy green, today takes about 5 seconds on this platform, our IBM Food Trust platform, to kind of figure that out. So the blockchain in itself is not the answer to it, but blockchain is an enabling technology that is trying to remove that inefficiency of the trust and all the cost and time parameters that are involved to mitigate that mistrust.
Thanks, Sachin. I think that's a really valid point, and a stat that came out recently was something around the lines of 80% of C-suite execs within the FMCG space don't have full visibility over their supply chains. One of the our fellow attendees also said putting all these packages together and looking at the integration and how they play in favor of the customers is really important. I invite you, we just have a few minutes left of this webinar. I invite all of the attendees to ask questions to the panel. Oswald, I'm going to ask you a question now. How can we practically build a decentralized supply chain ecosystem through which all of the players, so shipping lines, freight forwarders, insurance providers, etc., can work together?
Thanks for the question. I used to be a solutions architect too, and I'm very much aligned to Sachin's view and also Wolfgang's view on firstly focusing on the actual problem and use cases, and then kind of connecting up what the solution will be. And so my view on it on a practical level is I'm inspired by some of the frameworks I've seen, for example, from IMDA in Singapore's trade trust framework, where there's a recognition that you're not going to get all industries to stand up at the same time, leverage the exact same technology and the exact same business process to digitize trade. That's going to be a bridge too far. But what you can do, for example, and let's use an electronic bill of lading or a warehouse receipt as an example. What you can do is say, well, blockchain is a great technology potentially just to manage title management. How do we ensure we know who owns the title of a specific cargo at any given point in time? And potentially by focusing in the technology on its strength across all industries and have it enable a very specific use case that it can uniquely do, that could work while still leaving the various companies and industries to still leverage the solutions they want to use, whether it's to move the document around, execute the business process around it the way they want to. So I think practically there's a recognition that needs to happen, that it's not just a blockchain world. We're going to have multiple technologies, and we need to have multiple industries have the freedom to leverage the technology that works best for them. And this is ultimately how we're going to do it. Now, what's the big how is that where we do need to go and create consensus is not necessarily on we're all going to join platform X, but it's the recognition that on items like identity, invoicing, electronic bill of lading, warehouse receipts, potentially on those, we need a set of standards so that as we move between different solutions, it becomes easier for us to accept identity, for example, between platform A and B as the same, in short. So that's a very long way of saying is I think the practicality is that we will have a diverse landscape of technologies. We need to leverage the right technology for the right challenge, but we do need to standardize on a set core group of information architecture elements that can help further enable these solutions globally.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I know we can also learn from what the regulators are doing and also how they implement some of these in other markets. I think we were talking about what's going on in the German market with the electronic bill of lading, and looking forward to Jaco de Jong's presentation a little bit later, particularly around electronic bills of lading and the digitization of them. So I guess now just closing this onto a few final future looking points, and I turn back to Wolfgang. We're both big fans of the Gartner hype evolutionary cycle here for various technologies. What's your view on what next? Where's the industry going? Oh, I think you're on mute again.
I think we have reached a point where we have understood, and I'm happy to hear that it's not about technology. It is about solutions and about a very pragmatic approach to using technology. I also saw now in the course of COVID-19 that there is a new element coming up again and again, which is it's not even about solutions, it's about people. And that people have to start working together and build collective intelligence. And and get going with some of the things which we have already imagined, but we're not able to do. And there I'm fully with Oswald. I think it's important to get the right people in the room, and a great diversity, and then redesign the world in a way which takes into account the possibilities we have today, and which also throws overboard what this traditional industry called supply chain has carried over the years, which, for example, is a lot of paper, a lot of manual processes. And I think we have a unique opportunity now with COVID-19 to build forward better.
Thank you very much. And just one question for the panel, and perhaps Oswald, I'm going to ask you to elaborate on how can organizations, institutions such as the ICC support things like the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement with some of the solutions that we've alluded to and focused on today?
Yeah, I think it's ultimately, making sure that we enable the digitization of trade through practical steps, and that we bring the right parties together to do that. And when I say the right parties, if I take, for example, Unitrol and their model law for electronic transferable record, how do we actually enable individual governments to actually adopt the model law in their own context, as opposed to trying to do something that might be more high level when it comes to the approach? And then secondly, how do we enable not just the existing platform owners that we know of, but a whole suite of new SMEs and new innovative companies that have a local context to flourish? And I think, again, I'm a firm believer that as we enable the legislation that enables us to move to digitization, and as we create the standards that break down the barriers of entry into this market, you'll see a whole host of new solutions flourishing out of the region that probably wasn't able to do so in the past. A lot of SMEs don't have a decade or 5 years to build up membership numbers to get everyone on board. And so how do we reduce that barrier of entry so that we can get more people to actually participate and enable, within their regional context?
Thank you very much. I'm afraid that's all we have time for, but I'd really like to thank Oswald, Sachin, and Wolfgang for their excellent contributions to this really, really great panel session. Back over to you.
Okay. So thank you, Dipesh and panel, for the interesting insights on global practices, issues, and the possible way forward in this new exciting environment. I remember when I was attending one of the ICC Banking Commission meetings, there was a panel that was discussing, I think it was probably 2016. At that time, the topic of digitization may not have been as frequently being discussed as now. But at that point of time, we're even discussing that we don't want to end up in so-called digital islands, which is practically having couple of banks and providers on different platforms that are not connected or interoperable with other solutions and providers. So I think the point that's being made by the ICC to make sure that irrespective of the platform, we have proper standards that everybody can work on. And definitely this is the new evolution in trade. Trade, I mean, it's hundreds of years old. It didn't go much of a change and evolution, but I think, now things are changing and the game is definitely changing. So digging deeper now into the tools that can be used in such an environment, we have our next session that will be on paperless trade. And no one better to give us to understand it than Jaco de Jong, who's the head of global sales in Bolero. Jaco possesses over 35 years of experience in international trade and commodity finance banking space, having worked for both and with major trade banks over the past 3 decades. With his vast wealth of knowledge and deep understanding of trade finance and digitalization processes from a bank, corporate, and fintech perspective. That's why Jaco serves as a trusted advisor to numerous corporations and financial institutions across the globe. In his role as Global Head of Sales at Bolero, Jaco provides customers with pragmatic expert support and advice in their transition towards adopting and embedding trade digitalization into their businesses. We are delighted to have you today with us, Jaco. Over to you.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning all. And Nasser, thank you so much for your very kind introduction and for allowing me to speak here. So thanks to the Islamic Development Bank and ITFC for allowing me to speak. I have a slot of about 20 minutes and a lot to share. So I'm going to do my best to give you a pragmatical overview on how companies, whether it's buyers, sellers, traders, and banks, can get going on digital trade. And I'm also going to explain what we do in that business area. If I may ask for the slides to come up. Or would you like me to share my screen that I bring up the slides? What is easier?
Yes, Jaco, if you can go ahead and share it from your side, if it's possible.
Okay. Sure. So hopefully you can now see my slide enabling paperless trade from a Bolero perspective. So a bit about the company and the background of what we do and what we have been doing for actually over 2 decades. So we started 22 years ago as an initiative within SWIFT. And basically the name Bolero actually stands for Bill of Lading Electronic Registry Organization. We started as an initiative in SWIFT, and basically we had 2 goals. One was to enable a secure way for banks and corporates to communicate around their trade transactions. And the other angle was to come up with an electronic equivalent that is legally binding and acceptable all around the globe for the electronic bill of lading. And I'll come to that in a few seconds a bit more. What we do and what we have been doing is bridging what we call the financial and the physical supply chain domains. So we focus on the documentation around the physical supply chain, goods going from A to B, and the documents around that, and making those documents available under the financial supply chain, which can be anything from an open account transaction to a traditional trade transaction to even blockchain transactions. So that's why it says here, we support the full range of solutions with our product suite. And the last part over there on this slide is that we're currently rolling out our new technology stack, which means that, you know, our users, again, all these areas can use a very state-of-the-art solution, which is called Galileo. And that is a very easy way to handle these transactions, because it's one thing that you want to go digital, but also you need the right tools, and they need to be clear and they need to be easy to use. I'll be talking today more about, you know, traditional trade, but also I want to make this point that we also support, you know, these new initiatives out there. And here are a few of them: Contour, Marco Polo, DLT Ledgers, Conchain, Envoy. So basically what we do from a Bolero perspective is we support still the old-fashioned, you know, letters of credit, documentary collections, that traditional world, but we also support, you know, the innovations in the blockchain space. And from our perspective, it doesn't matter if it's Corda, if it's Hyperledger or Ethereum, we can link to all these initiatives based on, you know, the fact that we use the latest technology from our perspective. And these initiatives can be supported by using our user experience and our Galileo tools. Now, this is about our company, about what we do, about the tools, and also towards the end of these slides, there are my contact details. So if you have any questions on the company or on what we can do for you, just reach out to me directly. But for the purpose of today, I want to make a very pragmatic presentation on how to get started. How do you get started with digital trade? How do you get started with e-presentations? And for today, I'm going to focus on having electronic presentations under letters of credit. Because as we all know, letters of credit are still heavily used around the globe. Regardless of all the new initiatives out there, that is still the case out there. Interestingly enough, and we also spoke about ICC today, like with Oswald, we, as from a Bolero perspective, already in 2010, we supported the first use of electronic documents under traditional letters of credit. These letters of credit, of course, had to be subject to the EUCP. Those are, of course, related to the UCP 600 rules, but then specifically for electronic presentations. And meanwhile, you have the EUCP 2.0, again, another initiative from the ICC. So we have been doing that under letters of credit already since 2010. However, still globally, you see that the numbers are still low. However, it really depends on the regions. We see a lot of activity already for a long time in the Asia Pacific area. We recently see a lot of demand and interest for electronic presentations, especially under LCs in the Middle East region, which is very, very interesting from our perspective. To points of the other speakers before me in the other sessions is that e-presentations have meanwhile gone global, and we expect that they will grow exponential. COVID-19, from our perspective, has had a huge impact in the interest in digitization, the interest in moving away from paper. Just to give you one example, we have over 230 carriers connected to Bolero, and one of our major carriers in March and April of this year, between March and April, the number of electronic bills of lading issued over the Bolero platform quadrupled. So for one carrier, 4 times more electronic bills of lading issued between the month of February and April. And that's, of course, when COVID really started to hit the business. Interestingly enough, we didn't see that spike in e-presentations under bank transactions. So to us, that was a clear signal that companies are very flexible to move on how they do their business. And if the paper documents get stuck, they are pretty much open to quickly explore other ways. And in our case, for instance, use electronic bills of lading. However, what we will also see in these times of crisis, and it's still continuing, the COVID-19, but there are also, of course, political crisis also happening around the globe. Letters of credit will remain to be used and will probably increase in terms of usage. Maybe the value per LC will go down, but I expect, that the numbers will still be there. Also, what we have seen is that, and I think also Oswald referred to that, business continuation processes have started to emerge. People certainly had to work from home. It's very hard to handle documents from home, not just for corporates, but also for banks. And we have seen alternatives popping up, like, for instance, Swift, enabled the File Act route to do e-presentations. However, I want, again, from a pragmatic perspective, mention that those e-presentations are indeed securely exchanging documents, but it's not really e-presentations in the terms that you can, for instance, exchange title documents. And of course, an electronic bill of lading is a title document. So even if you have such a workaround in place, remember that you still will have to, at some point in time, exchange the original documents. And in our case, it's much easier to use electronic documents from the start. So how do you start on e-presentations? It requires a way to think differently. I often say, even with all the blockchain initiative, smart contracts, IoT devices, AI, OCR, we work with many of those solutions and providers. You have to think, before anything goes digital, even the blockchain contract, you have to move away from paper. If you're going to stick to paper, all these innovations will be very difficult. So you have to think about, okay, why do I use paper, or how can I move away from paper? And then you have to look at, the need, the underlying need from a corporate perspective, for instance. If it's around the financial supply chain, for instance, why do I use a letter of credit? In basis, in essence, a letter of credit is a payment instrument. It's a risk mitigation instrument, and it is a tool which will trigger payment based on certain conditions. Also for the physical supply chain, which documents do I use? Which documents do I really need? And also, do I have to present all the documents that I need for the physical supply chain? Do I really need to have them presented under the letter of credit? The answer is no. A letter of credit can be payable against anything, even an unsigned invoice. However, over time, it has been complicated a lot to include many other documents. So let's look at which documents do you really need to present under an LC? Which documents do you really need to clear the goods, on location if the goods are arriving? So that's where we can help, and that's where you see these digitization initiatives happening. Also, if you want to move away from paper, you have to realize that it's a transition phase. It is a process where you move away from paper. And very importantly, sometime the chain breaks. In our scenario, we work with exporters, importers, carriers, shipping companies, banks. Sometime down the line, the electronic chain can break. For whatever reason. Sometimes in some countries, the ports still only accept paper bills of lading to clear the goods. Sometimes a corporate does not want to sign up to Bolero in our case. So the chain can break. But there are fallback scenarios in place when the chain breaks. So it's not a reason not to start, because there's always a fallback scenario. So what is a fallback scenario? In our case, there's always the option to go back to paper. So even if, in our case, an electronic bill of lading starts as a digital document from the carrier, from the shipping company, it is handed over to the shipper. And if it's a letter of credit, it's handed over to the negotiating bank and to the issuing bank. And for instance, the buyer says, I would still like to have a paper bill of lading for whatever reason. Then within Bolero, there's the option to switch back to paper. And then in that case, the last person in the digital chain can ask the carrier, the shipping company, to produce an electronic bill of lading that mirrors and replaces the paper bill of lading. And then the process can still continue. And then still you have increased the speed, you've reduced the risk up until that last moment, and thereafter the document can continue as a paper document going forward. So that is a thing, except that the world is not digital yet. There are digital islands, there are gaps, there are some governments, there are some countries, some regulators that still insist on paper. That doesn't mean that you can't start on the digitization journey, because there are workarounds to eventually still end up with paper if needed. So how do you go about e-presentations? And if you, for instance, I think a good way to start is using the traditional letters of credit first. For electronic documents to work, you need a legal framework. In our case, we call it the rule book. And basically, why do you need a legal framework? Sending an electronic document is nice, but it doesn't always have value. Just to give you a very simple example, I'm actually looking into the sun here in the Netherlands, but if I'm sitting here and if I would put a euro banknote here on my table in Amsterdam, let's say a 10 euro banknote here on my table in Amsterdam, if I would take a picture, I would turn it into a PDF, I would encrypt it, I would sign it digitally, and I would make it available to you. Have I really given you 10 euros? No, I've given you a perfect picture, encrypted, digitally signed in a secure way of a 10 euro banknote. So for this document, whether it's a PDF or whatever, to have value, you need more than just a digital image or a digital document. You need to have a legal framework around it. And that's why a rule book is so important. So for digital documents to work, you need a rule book, you need rules, you need a legal framework. Also, you need to make sure that it's transferred securely. These days, what we see as well, if you start to send documents around via email, for instance, emails can get hacked. So the transportation method, in our case, the Bolero network, needs to be fully secure. The next thing what you need to think about is that the letter of credit itself needs to cater for e-presentations. So that means that some things need to be different in terms of the letter of credit. First of all, the parties in our case would need to be signed up to Bolero so they can exchange the documents, but the wording of the LC needs to be different. First of all, of course, it needs to be subject to the EUCP rules, which are again, issued by the International Chamber of Commerce, but also normally a letter of credit would show documents have to be presented at the counters of bank ABC, on a certain date. Now it would have to state that the documents will be presented over the Bolero network. And of course, the last thing is that the letter of credit needs to specify that instead of a paper bill of lading in 3 originals and so many non-negotiable copies, now an EBL needs to be presented over the Bolero platform. So that is important, and we have the templates, and we're used to helping the clients there as well. Also, you need to make sure that both the financial supply chain can work, in this case a letter of credit, and that the physical supply chain can work as well. So you need to make sure that, for instance, just to give you one example, we've been supporting exports out of India for 4 years already with digital documents. And right now we know that export or imports into India also will now be able to be handled with fully electronic documents. Same goes for other regions as well, and also for specific industries. Another thing that's important, and I also Oswald mentioned that on title registries and things like that. In this world, especially in commodity trade finance, making sure that you don't double finance, that you are taking, if you're taking collateral as a bank, that you are the single pledgee holder. That is very important as well. So again, from our perspective, we have a pledge functionality where a party can pledge an electronic bill of lading to another party to act as security for financing. Pledge functionality, something you might want to consider. And of course, also, you always have to realize that corporate clients will be using multiple carriers, multiple trade lanes, multiple banks or financiers. So the network effect is very important in terms of the carriers, the trade lanes, the geographies, and of course the banks to be used. I think Wolfgang mentioned a bit earlier, it's not about technology. It is definitely not about technology. It's about adoption, it's about trust, and it's about the user experience. It has to make sense. Whether it's blockchain technology in the background, great. If it's old-fashioned technology, great, as long as it works, as long as it's practical. So to come to my story and to try and wrap it up within the time allocated to me, if you are thinking about digital trade, it requires a paradigm shift. You first have to think about, then I need to move away from paper, because you cannot stick to paper and go towards digital trade. That is just a no-go. Also, it is an evolution, not a revolution. It will take time. As said, we did the first e-presentation under letters of credit in 2010. We're now in 2020, and the trade world hasn't really moved dramatically yet. It is still going slow. Open account trade will adjust the quickest. Definitely. That's what we've seen with this example of these e-bills of lading quadrupling between March and April of this year with one of our major carriers. The traditional trade will follow at an increasing pace. We do see that things are moving forward. Because of the topic of today, from an Agri perspective, we have been supporting Agri customers for a long time. We also see things happening there as well in terms of the documents. We're working together, for instance, with the Grain Trade Council on e-phytosanitary certificates, because we see that things are moving. We see that there's a realization that also some other key documents will need to have a fully digital equivalent as well. And of course, we are definitely supporting the DSI initiative, because yes, there are these digital islands out there, but we need to start thinking about, how can we work together? How can we make sure that, systems can connect to each other? How can we ensure interoperability? So definitely we are there. Personally, I'm also on the ICC, on the steering committee for digital trade. I'm also co-chairing a work group there. I think, the world is ready for digital trade, and the world is ready for, cooperating and going forward. What the ultimate solution will be, I think nobody knows, but I think nobody questions that over time, trade will go digital. And again, I'm repeating myself, it's not about technology, it's about adoption, it's about trust, and it's about user experience. So hopefully I've remained within my the time allocated to me. My purpose was to give you a bit of a taste on how to get going, how to pragmatically approach digitization in trade. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask.
Thank you, Jaco, and thank you for keeping in line with the time. In fact, we have two questions, one of which I believe towards the end of your presentation, you addressed it beautifully, which was, regarding focusing on electronic bill of ladings. What about the other shipping documents like certificate of origin, phytosanitary certificate, invoices, etc.? So it's not practical to use a hybrid model or a semi-digital model where only one document, which is digital or electronic bill of lading, is there, but the other or the rest is paper-based. So I believe, in the course of your presentation, you said that you guys are working on that. Yes. The second question, which really makes sense, it's somewhat easier to onboard the private sector, but how do you secure the authorities buy-in?
Okay, so that's a very good question. Basically, why does Bolero and the e-presentations and the electronic bill of lading, why does it work around the globe? Is because of that legal infrastructure that we have. All the parties working on Bolero actually adopt the legal framework. That means within that basically club structure, everybody agrees to the rules of the game. I sometimes compare it like you can play tennis or football or cricket all around the globe because everybody knows the rules of the game. So regardless of local standards on digital signatures or local regulations around any other specific, if you use the Bolero environment and the Bolero electronic bills of lading, and because all parties agree to the same rule book, you can do these transactions all around the globe. That doesn't mean that we don't talk to regulators and central banks and port authorities, customs authorities, definitely, because it requires a lot of education and explanation. But from a pragmatic perspective, this has been working already for 2 decades around the globe.
And, I second your point, Jaco, regarding being pragmatic and to push the adoption. We have seen that during the time of the lockdown, and the whole world was practically shut down for COVID, even at the level of G20. The G20 trade ministers and in the technical meetings, everybody was pushing for adoption of digital technology to ensure that the trade lines are open and trade continues to flow, because it was essential to keep goods flowing across the globe. So I believe this, this could be the silver lining, so to speak, when it comes to the COVID-19 pandemic, that it pushed the adoption of many technologies, and digital trade and digital supply chain was no exception, because it helped the world keep moving. And hopefully everybody in the digital trade supply chain can build on that momentum going forward. So, thank you, Jaco, for your time and for your insights. I'm sure the discussion can last longer, but we're grateful for your time with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jaco. So now, moving forward, let's look into what else does it take to manage the digital supply chain. And we are delighted to have with us Carlina Marani. She's based in the Netherlands. Carlina leads the business development in EMEA region for TradeLens. She has worked for IBM for 9 years in different roles, helping clients with their journey to digital transformation. Notable projects include a digital twin rollout in one of Europe's biggest ports, as well as several digitalization projects in the maritime and oil sector in the Netherlands. Of course, we all understand, I mean, the importance of these sectors and their percentage when it comes to global supply chain. So we'd be interested really to hear Carlina's experience, and we're thankful again for her to come join us and share her knowledge. Carlina, over to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for having me. It's nice to see you have a lot of people from the Netherlands. So it was good. Let me see if I can start sharing. No, is it possible? Wait 1 moment. Oh, yes,
Okay,
thank you.
Okay, so
thank you
go
so
ahead.
much. That is better. So TradeLens, and I'm glad that Jacco indicated that it's all about network and trust. So if we look at TradeLens, TradeLens is an open supply chain platform globally set up by IBM and Maersk. If you look at trade, and I think not to repeat part of Jacco's presentation, but indeed we're still looking at paper-based processes, data being trapped in organizational silos, of course. A lot of manual work to be done also around the paper, which is time consuming. And what we also see, of course, is that in a lot of cases, if we look at trade, clearance takes way too long and is often subject to fraud, which all together leads to high costs and poor customer service. So TradeLens has a mission, if we can move to the next slide. And the mission is to connect the ecosystem to make sure we all work together, that we do real information sharing, true information sharing between parties, that we foster collaboration and trust. I think I heard that word before also, and that we spur innovation so that we make the digital trade available through modern technology, being APIs, and that, of course, we also spur innovation through working with associations to set market standards. So if we could move to the next slide. So if we would look at TradeLens, what TradeLens does is we follow containers worldwide on their journey from the cargo owner through every bit of journey they take. You could think of a freight forwarder, customs and authorities, of course, where there's a lot of document handling, the ports and terminals, and then, of course, on one of the ships of the carriers next to the next port. And then I'm not seeing the screen anymore. 1 moment. Are you still hearing me?
Yes, yes, Carlina, we can hear you.
Okay, that is strange. I can't see my own screen anymore. Through to the next port until it reaches the end client on the other end. So what does TradeLens do? We capture all the events and all the shipping milestones that you could have around this container moving. That's normally around 150 events. So you could think of the customs release message, you could think of a carrier release, or when the container is stripped. So all these events and all these shipments data are tracked on TradeLens. And we do the same with all the documents surrounding the container. So Nasser, I heard you repeat a question about other documents than, for example, the letter of credit that was asked. So if we look at TradeLens, all documents surrounding a container can be put on the platform. So that could be, as you said, certificate of origin, for example, a packing list, commercial invoice, etc. Of course, we start with the bill of lading, which is put on the platform directly by the carriers. And we can receive these documents both in a structured way. So there's a list of documents that we already have in a structured way, which means it's completely digitalized. And then there's a part of the documents that are unstructured. All of this is then hashed onto the blockchain. The blockchain layer, we use a Hyperledger solution so that the documents become immutable. So you know what the audit trail is, where the document comes from, and who has put a new version on. Can we move to the next slide? So if we look at the TradeLens ecosystem today, and as said, my colleague said network. So the network we have today is really big. So we're working with most of the carriers at the moment. We have fully integrated at this point Maersk, CMA, MSC, ZIM, Seaboard, Submarine, of course. And we are slowly working towards integrating more of the carriers. At this point, we have 50% of global container shipping volume on, and we're moving to 60 plus percent. We are also extending intermodal and rail, so more on the land leg. And we, of course, have coverage on ports and terminals on 6 continents. As said, a global platform where we have data from up to 600 ports and terminals, and we have 140 plus ports and terminals directly integrated into TradeLens. We are expecting to end up with 200 ports end of year. So that's going fast. You could think of, for example, DP World is connecting all their terminals to TradeLens. Can we move to the next slide? So if we look at the participants, as said, it's all about network. So we have network members that build the platform with us and, of course, benefit from us. So it's a data exchange. You can think of the ocean carriers, as said, who are the founding members of this platform. You can think of the ports and terminals, intermodal operators, and the government authorities. And then there, of course, are the TradeLens clients, the ones that benefit the most from all the visibility data that is on the platform and the possibility to do digital document handling. And those are both shippers, BCOs, freight forwarders, and financial services parties, as TradeLens also has a solution for trade finance. Can we move to the next slide? So you could think of, and I think the slides will be shared, so I will not pause on every slide a lot, so you can do a deep dive, but you can think of staying ahead of your deliveries because you know where your containers are, where your goods are, especially in the container. You get near real-time insight. And in this way, you can offer real-time sales support, right? You know what the ETA is and where your goods are and when they will arrive at your customer. Can we move to the next slide? So you could also think about improving productivity, increasing productivity with a secure and permissioned document handling. I think paperless trade has been discussed today already. So we see a lot of clients that spend a lot of money on sending the documents they need by FedEx, which incurs high costs. Documents get lost. They might be barely legible. So it is a very easier solution to do that in a digital way. Can we move to the next one? And then, of course, you can easily and quickly integrate your supply chain partners. So when you decide to say, okay, I want to do track and trace and document handling on a digital platform, you can also involve your supply chain partners to do the same. So you could easily exchange both data and documents with them. Next, please. So if we look at what TradeLens then has as a solution, we have a couple of tiers to meet everybody's needs. So you could, for example, think of a freight forwarder that only wants essential information to add to the platform they already have. But you could also think about visibility. Say one of your agricultural members wants to ship. We've just been talking to a citrus exporter in Africa, for example. They want to ship their containers and they want to know where they are, but they also want to get a notification when it gets stuck in the terminals, or they want a dashboard where they can see all the information surrounding their containers. So that is a possibility. And then, of course, you have the highest level that somebody says, we want to do everything paperless. We want to do track and trace, have full visibility, have the dashboard, but also do all document handling together with our suppliers. You could look at collaboration. Next, please. So as said, dashboard. So you could think of a high-level view. This is an example of that you can see where are my containers. Are they in a layover? Are they on the water? And where are they in the world? And then if you look at the next slide, you can see, for example, that you can drill down to changes to ETA, booking details, for example. So there's more and more drill downs we have available on the dashboarding. And there are also cases when a customer asks to have customized a customized solution, we can build further integration for them. Next slide, please. So this is a high overview of TradeLens. You can find a lot of information on our website, and also if you go to docs.tradelens.com, you can see everything you need to do full integration with the technology. So any technological questions can be answered there. And on the ecosystem list, you can find everybody that is connected as a network member to the system at the moment. On commercial partners connected or clients connected to TradeLens, it will be good to reach out to me. So I have shared my data here, so feel free to get in touch with me, reach out, and I can answer any extra questions you might have. Thank you so much, Nasser, for giving me the time to talk about TradeLens.
Thank you, Carlina, for joining us and for staying well within the time. Your presentation is really insightful and interesting. And indeed, you were talking about the global network. So 50% and going on to reach 60% of the global carriers is indeed a big percentage and a very wide network. But we have here 3 questions. Yes. More or less relate to one way or the other to the interoperability and cooperation. Okay, so yes. the first question is saying, how do you ensure interoperability and cooperation with other carriers who might be sensitive to collaborate under the Maersk umbrella? For instance, we have seen CMA, CGM, and Costco building another consortium that is the Global Shipping Business Network. Yeah. I know. So, of course, and I think Jacco also indicated that there's a lot of platforms. We will not know who will be, in the end, the final platform. And I am convinced we will end up with multiple platforms interconnecting between each other in the end, with different collaborations, ways of collaboration. But if we look at TradeLens at the moment,
So as said, MSC and CMA, they are both part of TradeLens and part of GSBN. So they are taking part in both platforms. And yes, we are talking to most of the carriers. I think we will, if we look at geopolitics, we will always have a situation that maybe, for example, Costco or the Asian market decides to build their own platform. We will try to get as far as we can on global shipping volume. I am not expecting us to reach 100%, but if we reach 70 to 80% and somebody else does 30%, for example, in Asia, then at a certain point we can see how we can integrate those two networks.
Okay, so I mean, the second question is somewhat related and it's probably a little bit technical. So it says, is your model based on APIs allowing collaboration with other players? Is that an option?
Yeah, so it's fully based on API. So we've got two ways to connect. The main one is through APIs. As said, if you go to docs.tradelens.com, you can even find the Swagger, so you can look at all the APIs available and you can see if you are able to integrate. So yes, it is. And for the companies that might be, let's say, a little old-fashioned, and we see that a lot with ports and terminals, for example, who want to connect through EDI, that is still a possibility. But all the APIs are openly available, so feel free to have a look.
Excellent. And as you rightfully mentioned, I mean, the presentation as well as a full recording of the session will be posted on the event website. The last question is interesting. I mean, does both ports of source and destination need to be on board TradeLens for this to work?
Yeah, so that's a question I get a lot, right? When we speak to clients and they say, yeah, but our port is not on or our customs is not on. That does not mean we would not have the information you would need about your shipment, because of course we are directly integrated with the carriers. So we would get, let's say that a local customs is not connected, we would still get a customs release message either through the carrier or through the port or terminal. So we would still have that information. So if you want to know if TradeLens has enough information for you, you feel free to just reach out to me and we can look into the system, see which trade lanes you are using and what percentage of information we would have on that specific trade lane. And we can also do a demo with your own data if you really want to look at the information that is available for your company in TradeLens.
Okay, Carolina. I mean, once again, we thank you for taking the time to join us and sharing your valuable experience and insights. And
you are very welcome. It was
and we look
a pleasure
forward
to be here.
Cooperate with you in future projects.
Thank you so much, Nasser. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Carolina. Bye. Okay, so we still have one presentation lined up, and to wrap it all up. Internet of Things is the new major thing. While in the 90s, the internet and connectivity of computers was the big thing, IoT now is the new connectivity drive. In fact, even IP version 6 was developed taking into consideration the need to connect a host of new devices to the internet. To talk about IoT, we are joined with Jans Moon. And Jans, forgive me if I get your name wrong. I did try to practice it a lot. Jans is head of the IOTA Foundation Trade and Supply Chain Efforts. He holds an executive MBA from INSEAD and a Master in Philosophy from Copenhagen University. He has a diversified experience in private companies, consulting, and NGOs, including 9 years in Maersk, the famous shipping line with focus on strategy, business development, and sustainability. Jans is an expert advisor on trade and distributed ledger technology, supporting the UK Parliament, World Economic Forum, and corporate advisory boards. Jans is also a pioneer in building public-private partnership to enable better trade for all, including co-founder of the Global Alliance for Trade Facilitation and the Logistics Emergency Team with World Food Program. And we all know that the World Food Program won the Nobel Peace Prize this year. So congratulations, Jens, on being part of the team. With a very quiet and interesting career, Jens has a lot to offer, and we are delighted to have you with us. Jens, over to you.
Thank you very much for this introduction, Nasser. I'm very pleased to be here with you today. I am just trying to see if I can share my screen. Somebody else is sharing. There we go. Thank you very much. Yes, so I have had the honor to talk to you today, and I will talk about IoT and the connectivity with what we call blockchain. I just want to say that it feels like everything is coming a little together today. I actually was part of the study that Deepesh mentioned in the beginning about the avocados. So when I was in Mursk, I was part of the group doing that study on how much documentation and communication it takes to move a container of avocados. So it's very interesting to be with all of you today here. What I wanted to share with you is work we've done around farming, agri, where we are using the IOTA distributed ledger and why that is relevant. Then I want to leverage that to talk about the fact that when you use blockchain, it's not just a product, it is an infrastructure, and what that means in the way you architect your solutions. And then talk a little bit about the technology we have and how you're getting involved and how you use it. So I hope that's a bit aligned with the topic. We've been working, and the example I'm giving you here is from Norway. We've been working with a consortium of companies in Norway that basically includes the biggest Norwegian corporate partners around agriculture, and they wanted to understand how could they actually gather data from the supply chain. And when you drink a glass of milk, could you know where from what farm it comes, what cow, how is that cow fed? Actually, that food the cow ate, where does that come from? Where was it harvested, and so on. So we built a little demo with them and the knowledge around that. So that's briefly my introductions to the talk today. And of course, I think after the discussions here today, and I'm listening into the other audience, it is very clear everybody has agreed that these are ecosystems, and the challenges that these ecosystems of suppliers, farmers, vegetarians, laboratories, dairies, and retailers, of course, and all the others, they are siloed. That data is siloed. They're not really sharing that data, and it's not being coordinated, and that's why we don't have that kind of visibility. That was the onset of the challenge of this collaboration. It was estimated by Future Farm, who was heading the project, that Norwegian agriculture could save millions, hundreds of millions of Norwegian kroners, which is still quite a lot amount of money if you divide it by 6 to get it in dollars. And the fact was that you both had a lot of inefficiencies, but you also have very high risk and unnecessary cost because you didn't have the overview. One of their examples was that there was a drought in Norway some years back, and because they didn't understand to what extent they had enough fodder, not grass, they had to slaughter many of the animals and starting to import expensive fodder for these animals, and that gave them an insight into what are at stake here if you don't create this kind of insight from all actors. So the way we approached this was that we said, build a digital twin of we took the example of round bales. Round bales are these haystacks, but by making a digital twin and making sure that everybody, every actor around this ecosystem could add input to this ecosystem. So you could add input around it was harvested at this field receive that type of fertilizer that will come from Yara, which is the fertilizer company. And these are the laboratory tests that was in the process and so on. We could start to leverage the data silos that was in each company and add that to the digital twin. And then you could start to inherit that information going up the chain. So the cow that ate this hay from this round bale had the food from there. You could start to understand actually, so what was most efficient, and there are numbers saying that if you feed with the right fodder, you can reduce the methane gas for such a cow with 30%. So the whole thing is actually, is making everything more efficient by data. And I think this message kind of everybody is agreeing here. This message got in. The thing is, how do you build an ecosystem around that? And I want to emphasize here that you got to think about this as an infrastructure and not just a solution. So we're not thinking about this just a solution from one industry for few actors, but the fact that no matter who you work with, here's some examples of who you work with, that data has a standard way of being shared with each other, and that you can start to use the same data. So if we talk smart devices, we work with ST Micro, which is building silicon. The fact that they can directly from their smart devices issue a transaction that goes onto a distributed ledger, the IOTA ledger. Everybody else can pick that data up in a trusted way, and STM or whoever owns the data can decide who's allowed to see it. So you don't build centralized platform systems, but you build an infrastructure for trust, a way of trusting, sharing data with each other. So you get you get the really decentralized system, and having that kind of vision is what drives us. Another partner we work with is Zebra. And Zebra Technologies, if you don't know them, they are a world leader in RFID readers, barcode scanners, and all these kind of devices. So if you go into a warehouse or you go to a retailer, there's a high likelihood that it's one of their devices that reads the information. And what I find really interesting in our collaboration with them is that by adding our technology behind this, you can make, a barcode, a digital twin, whatever it is, but everybody who scans this in the supply chain, so you have a legacy system of scanners around the world, that they immediately can report data to this ledger and fetch data from it using just a scan. And thereby you reduce the frictions about starting to share data with each other. The key thing is here, of course, that all these scanners are owned by somebody, so they can decide who's allowed to then see the data that will be transported to the ledger. And I think this is an example of where I think we need to go. The fact that the technology is close to being ready for really mass production, the underlying technology for having this amount of transactions, and when we talk about going down to item level, and we have the decentralized aspects, so you can organize that data. So I think we're close to being there. What is more challenging is the collaboration between business, understanding this, how this works, and then absolutely also, as Oswald was talking about, the standardization of how that data is shared. And I think that will take longer time than the technology to be ready. The example here is that, when we have integrated the IOTA technology behind the Zebra technology, that means that all these actors who's already having legacy systems and having readers and scanners around the world, or they have databases, whatever, they can now share it directly, and you have a simple way to start to collaborate. And you can use your legacy systems, you can use what you already are using. And I think this is what we should look for, these kind of just adding an extra dimension, a new technology. And when we talk about Internet of Things, we talk about smart devices as when we talk about agriculture that can measure the water level or the temperature and share that kind of data and bring those transactions and then data directly to a ledger for others. So we talk about what we call a data marketplace, where IoT systems, whether they're smart or they are not so smart as a barcode, which is also an internet. You're also giving something a digital twin, make it a part of the Internet of Things with just a smart code. The fact is that we're starting to see, I would say, really a data place situation where people can share this data, decide who they share with, but in a trusted way and in an accountable way where they're accountable for the data they share. And you don't need the centralized parties to roll the rules around how you share with and how. So what is our technology? And just 2 words on that, because I think this is also something that needs to come into the discussion, is that the way we talked about blockchain until now, we're not a blockchain. We are distributed ledger, and there's something happening here in this field where the previous solutions with blockchain, they really were using a lot of energy, they were not scalable, and so forth. And we'll start to see that has really changed. I mean, we run more than 1,000 transactions per second on our main net and much more on private nets. And we have 0 fees, which is also important for supply chains. So all that data you share, all these transactions, the cost doesn't scale like you see with some solution where you have to pay higher gas and the miners have to take that. There's no miners here. So thinking about where we are in the next level, I think we can release some of those opportunities. So as a foundation, we are a non-for-profit foundation, the IOTA Foundation, and our core focus is to enable others to build. We think about it sometimes like Intel Insight, the fact that we don't build solutions, but it will be our partners like Cipro Technologies or STM Microelectronics or whoever builds, that they can integrate this technology and therefore take it to market. So we see this uptake faster and cheaper. What we have is really just the developer tools and some way of organizing data, some stacks that allows the developer community to work around us in a faster way and solve their business problems and add technology to the solutions that they're already developing. But in a way, so we're starting to see an ecosystem and people can share, and we get this marketplace of data sharing. We're starting to see this take up in different ways, that more and more companies are seeking patents using this kind of technologies. More and more developers are taking the courses and learning how to use the technologies. We are funding it with some grants ourselves for small projects with developers. So we're starting to see this ecosystem moving ahead, which is very exciting. And the last thing I wanted to share with you is a little bit about, we're getting a little bit into the technology here, but I think it's important to understand, because people have talked about this technology sometimes is very expensive. So I brought an example here, how you can actually integrate with the technology and use the technology, and you don't even have to contact us. But there are, it costs £1,000 or euros to educate a developer, and you can run a node for, let's say, €100 a month that allows you to do thousands of transactions. So you can very easily start to integrate your own systems and make them share data. And we're actually doing, now we're talking about a lot about ocean trade and trade lanes and and Bolero and so on. We're doing it with some governments in East Africa, where we are integrating directly into the revenue authorities and those border agencies, so they can publish the data to the Tangle in a secure way, in a trusted way, and in an accountable way. But it's gonna be cheap for them, and that then you start to create this ecosystem from the ground up, where people can connect and they can decide who they connect with. So that was my short presentation today. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jens, and thank you for keeping the time. I personally believe that the concept of the digital twin is a very interesting concept, and it seems that, I mean, this is something that we will be seeing more of as we move into more adoption of IoT technology. There are a couple of questions for you, Jens. The first one directly relates to what you said. I mean, you said that during the presentation that IoT technology provides a trusted way and a trusted source of information. However, this question challenges that, because the question indicates that IoT devices can be manipulated by humans to provide wrong readings. Can this be prevented through AI analytics to detect tampered or engineered data?
Yeah, that's a good one. And the only thing that we can secure here in IOTA is that the data that is immutable. But the questionnaire is completely right, that you know, we call it crab in, crab out, right? These can, of course, IoT devices or sensors can be manipulated. But you got to think about the accountability here also, because it's important that those devices then has an owner, or you can detect them and find back to the source of them, and you have this kind of accountability to who provided this potentially fake data. I'm sure there's lots of AI solutions out there also that can check validity, but I wouldn't say I'm an expert in that.
Okay, interesting. So the second question is a little bit technical in nature. And so do you think that we will start to see a migration from blockchain to other DLT technologies like Tangle, which is used by IOTA, Hashgraph, and Holochain?
I'm sure we will. And I think it's mainly due to the fact of cost and scalability. We haven't really, you know, the blockchain technology was kind of the first generation. And it has been it is very energy heavy. It is very costly to use. And you gotta get down to, you know, less than a cent for a transaction to make many of these business cases viable. And they are not on traditional blockchain technologies. So I'm pretty sure about that. But it would be weird if I had another opinion coming from IOTA as well.
Sure, and I think it all relates, I mean, to what to the probably the trend that we have been discussing in this webinar, that it's an evolution. Okay, so it's an evolutionary process. So as we move along and as technologies develop, definitely we'll be seeing some sort of migration from one way or the other. So the last question for now, and we have to cut it because of time. So for supply chain applications, do you believe in edge computing and having smart IoT devices or centralized intelligence?
I'm sure there's advantages to both, but what I really work with and I see is what's happening on the edge. And we are starting to see, you know, smaller companies coming out with smaller devices that can sense, let's say, water quality or humidity or GPS or whatever, but that they sign the transactions themselves on the edge, and they start also to communicate on the edge. And we are talking about something we call the economy of things, where they actually start to pay each other for the kind of data they need or information or service. So you don't have you don't necessarily have a centralized settlement system, but you will actually settle things on the edge between devices when they need data from each other to progress or to just access the internet and pay for that, or many use cases. That is, I think we only saw the beginning of what's happening on the edge.
Yes, exactly. I mean, we are just at the beginning, and although I mean the thing or the evolution or the process of digital trade started more or less around 2010. We are 10 years now in 2020. It has taken some time, but things are moving forward, and it is indeed an evolutionary process, and probably that the time now will be reducing in terms of how quick, I mean, the developments and the evolution will be going forward. And I still believe that there is a reason for everything to happen, and definitely this is one of the quote unquote, I mean, the benefits of COVID-19, of pushing everybody to move faster into the digital age when it relates to trade and supply chain. So Jens, we really thank you. Thank you for your time and for taking time to join us and sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, dear guests and audience, we are right on the dot. So I personally have learned a lot from the speakers and hope that you, the audience, did too. We had diversified perspective on digital supply chain from the industry experts. We now can see a glimpse of the future of digital supply chain and how it will look like in the coming few years, and the role of various technologies such as blockchain, IoT, and AI in making that the new norm. We have also heard about the ICC Digital Standards Initiative project and how it will contribute into the mass adoption and regulatory acceptance and moving away from non-connected digital islands. Probably we will be still seeing digital islands, but at least hopefully these digital islands will have routes and routes between them. On behalf of the leadership of the Islamic Development Bank and the International Islamic Trade Finance Corporation, we convey our appreciation and thanks for our eminent panelists and speakers for their brilliant contributions and shared insights and perspectives. Equally, we convey our appreciation and thanks to all of you, our participants to this webinar. To help us improve, we kindly ask you to take the survey for future events. We will be posting the recording of the webinar as well as the presentations in the event website. Once again, thank you very much for attending, and we look forward to seeing you soon in a future event. Stay safe and take care of yourself and your loved ones. All the best. Thank you very much.